All right, so today we're looking at a submission called 7 Common Parenting Mistakes. It's a really structured listicle. It outlines these pitfalls like overprotection, inconsistent discipline, that kind of thing, and it gives examples for each. It's a solid, logical foundation, but to really transform a parent's behavior, I think we need to move beyond just identifying errors and start providing more of a philosophy. So let's just get right into the critique. A key theme that seems to run through this is how it categorizes these really complex parenting behaviors into binary mistakes, which brings us to our first major point. The current draft treats these behaviors as black and white issues, and it's missing the necessary nuance where real-life parenting actually happens.
That is exactly what struck me. I mean, you read the headers, right? Point 1, overprotecting the child, and then point 6, giving too much freedom. And on paper, sure, those sound like clear errors. But in practice, parenting is almost entirely a gray area.
Right.
And by presenting them as these absolute negatives, like a pass-fail test, we risk alienating the reader. A parent might read this and think, well, I helped my kid with their science project last night because they were crying. Did I just overprotect them? Did I fail?
Yeah, it creates a defensive reaction right away. Because sometimes you just got to get the kid out the door. If you're running late and you tie their shoes for them, strictly speaking, that's overprotection because they could do it themselves. But does that make it a mistake?
Exactly. And that context is missing. So I wonder if we could reframe these points, not as mistakes to avoid, but as balances to strike. The feedback here should really encourage the writer to talk about the intent versus the execution. It's not about never help. It's about what kind of help are you giving?
I see what you're going for. Let's try to strengthen this with some concrete examples. So if we look at the overprotection section, the current example is a mother finishing her child's homework.
Which is a classic, almost a cartoonish example. Most parents know they shouldn't actually do the homework. But maybe we could look at the idea of the snowplow parent versus the scaffolding parent. I think that's a distinction the writer really needs to draw.
Scaffolding versus snowplowing. Okay, break that down for the writer.
So instead of the binary don't help, the advice becomes build the scaffold.
Precisely. We could suggest an example where the parent asks guiding questions. So instead of holding the pencil, the parent says, okay, looking at this problem, what's the first rule we learned about this? You're in the room, you're supporting them, but you aren't doing the heavy lifting. That shows the middle ground. It acknowledges that desire to help, but redirects it into a skill-building moment, not a dependency moment. That's so much more useful than just stop hovering. Okay, so let's look at the other end of that spectrum. Point 6, giving too much freedom. The example used is giving a teenager unlimited, unmonitored internet access.
Again, it's the extreme. Most parents aren't just handing over a smartphone and walking away. They're struggling with the negotiation. Can I have my phone in my room? Can I get TikTok? It's a constant battle. So instead of a binary switch, freedom or no freedom, we could explore the idea of progressive autonomy.
Progressive autonomy, it sounds like a policy, not just a rule.
Well, it implies movement. It implies earning it. We could suggest an example where a teenager gets internet access, but initially it's only in public areas of the house, the kitchen, the living room. That freedom is earned in increments, based on demonstrated responsibility.
So it's not a light switch being flipped on or off. It's more like a dimmer switch.
Exactly. And if the writer uses that metaphor, it gives the parent a tool. It's you're currently at level 1 freedom. Show me you can handle this, and we can unlock level 2. That is so much more actionable for a reader than just being told, don't give too much freedom, which is vague and kind of scary.
It moves the reader from a passive stance of avoiding errors to a more active one of managing growth. Okay, moving on to the next major lens. The argument here, as I understand it, is that the piece relies really heavily on negative framing, telling the reader only what not to do, which can just induce guilt rather than empowering them with tools.
So it's pervasive in this draft. Look at the headers. Inconsistent discipline, comparing the child, ignoring positive behavior. It's just a list of sins, really. And the why it's a mistake sections, they're accurate. They talk about insecurity, confusion, all that, but they leave a void. It's the whole don't think of a pink elephant problem.
Right. If I tell you don't yell, you're still just focused on yelling.
And when you're stressed, don't yell isn't a strategy, it's just a restraint. The reader knows they're failing. They know they shouldn't compare their kid to their cousin who plays piano perfectly. But the text doesn't explicitly name the alternative skill they need to practice. It just creates a vacuum.
So the suggestion is to basically flip the script.
Completely. We keep the warning. We still need to identify the pitfall, but we anchor the point in the positive skill that solves the problem. Make the actionable advice the hero of the section.
Okay, let's apply this. Point 2, inconsistent discipline. The example is a father punishing shouting one day and then ignoring it the next because he's tired. I think every parent on earth can resonate with that.
Oh, absolutely. But telling a tired parent to be consistent is like telling a drowning person to swim harder. They know. They just can't do it in the moment. So instead of just highlighting the inconsistency, what if we rename this section The Power of Predictability?
The power of predictability. That already sounds beneficial, not accusatory.
And for the concrete strategy, we need to take the burden off the parent's willpower. Maybe suggest a family agreement or a visual chart where the rules are literally written down. If the rule is on the fridge, we speak respectfully. The parent doesn't have to decide what to do. The fridge decides.
That's a really key distinction. You're externalizing the authority.
Right. The parent isn't the bad guy. The agreement is the boss. It saves the parent's energy, which makes consistency actually possible.
That is incredibly practical. Okay, what about point 3, comparing the child to others? This is a huge one. Why aren't you like your brother? That sort of thing.
Yeah, it just destroys a kid's self-worth. But simply saying don't compare is, well, it's fighting human nature. We're hardwired to compare. It's how we measure its status and safety. So we need to redirect that instinct, not just suppress it. I'd suggest replacing the don't compare advice with the concept of ipsative assessment.
Ipsative assessment. Okay, I have to be honest, if I say ipsative assessment to my partner, they're going to look at me like I'm speaking another language. We need to make sure the writer breaks that down.
Fair point. It sounds academic, but the concept is beautiful. It just means comparing the child only to their past self. So the writer needs to give a script. Instead of, why aren't you like your cousin, the script becomes, you improved your math score by 5 points since last week.
I see. So you're still satisfying that parental itch to measure progress.
Exactly. You're still comparing, so it scratches that itch, but you're measuring against the child's own baseline. It builds a growth mindset instead of a fixed one. But you're right, the writer has to give that specific example, or the term ipsative is just going to fly over everyone's head.
And finally, let's look at point 7, ignoring positive behavior.
The advice there is basically praise more. But more is so vague. When you're busy making dinner and checking emails, praise more is just another item on a to-do list you're already failing at. I would suggest giving a concrete ratio, like the 5.1 rule.
5 positive comments for every 1 correction.
Yes, and frame it as a game. Okay, I just criticized his shoes. That's 1 negative. Now I need to find 5 honest, positive things to say to balance the books. It turns a vague instruction into a gamified, measurable objective. It gives the reader something to actually count.
Excellent. Okay, so we're moving from negative prohibitions to positive skill building. Now, let's step back a bit and look at the architecture of the piece. The current draft really operates as 7 isolated islands of advice rather than a cohesive philosophy on, raising a human being.
That's the issue with listicles, right? You get point 4 and point 5 and they just look equal. But when I read through this, I saw these deep connections that the writer is missing. For instance, we have point 5, harsh punishment, and point 4, lack of communication. They're treated as separate technical errors.
But they're so obviously cause and effect. If I'm scared of your punishment, I'm not going to communicate with you.
Precisely. A parent using harsh punishment creates an environment where communication must fail because it's based on self-preservation. By listing them separately, the writer misses the forest for the trees. The reader might try to fix the shouting, but not the listening, missing that they're part of the same dynamic.
So how do we fix that structurally? We can't just tell them to toss the list format entirely.
No, but we can group them. I would recommend grouping these 7 points under broader thematic pillars. Create a kind of narrative arc.
Let's workshop that. You mentioned punishment and communication. What bucket would that go in?
I'd call that group 1.
emotional safety. You combine harsh punishment, lack of communication, and comparing the child. All three of those work together. If you do those three things, you destroy the psychological safety of the home. If you group them, you can explain to the reader that mistakes in this group damage the relationship.
That provides a very clear "so what" for the reader. It really raises the stakes. If I mess this up, I lose the bond.
Right. And then you look at the others. Inconsistent discipline, overprotecting, and giving too much freedom. What are those about? They're about the walls, the structure.
Let's call that group 2, structural integrity.
Perfect. These are all about boundaries. The feedback should suggest a visualization here. Boundaries are like the walls of a house. If they move, well, that's inconsistent discipline. If they don't exist, that's too much freedom. And if they're like padded cells, that's overprotection.
I love the padded cell imagery. It really drives home why overprotection is so stifling.
And the child feels unsafe in all three of those scenarios because the structure itself is faulty. If the writer uses these headers, the relationship and the structure, the reader isn't just correcting behaviors anymore. They're building a house.
That leads us perfectly into our final lens, audience alignment and the stakes of the piece. The why it's a mistake sections currently rely on these distant, abstract consequences rather than immediate, relatable impacts on the parent's daily life.
This is the biggest hurdle in parenting advice, I think. We always appeal to the long game. If you do this, your child will be dependent in 10 years, or your child might develop anxiety in their 20s. And while that's true, those are very distant fears.
And frankly, a parent who's dealing with a tantrum in the cereal aisle isn't thinking about the year 2035. They're thinking about the next 5 minutes.
Exactly. The stakes feel academic. We need to tighten that feedback loop. My suggestion is to advise the writer to include the immediate, short-term consequences of these mistakes to create urgency. We need to show how these mistakes make the parent's life harder today.
Okay. Let's look at lack of communication again. The current consequence listed is children may stop sharing their problems, which, sounds sad, but it's very passive.
Right. Let's make it active. What's the immediate consequence? The shutdown. Describe the silence at the dinner table tonight. Describe the car ride home where you ask, "How was school?" And you just get a one-word answer. That is pain the parent can feel right now.
It makes it urgent. If I don't fix my listening skills, I'm going to have a silent stranger living in my house this evening.
Exactly. Now let's look at inconsistent discipline. The text says it leads to confusion. Confusion it's a soft word. Let's describe the immediate exhaustion for the parent.
What does that look like?
It looks like the slot machine effect. This is a concept from behavioral psychology, intermittent reinforcement.
The slot machine effect? Unpack that. How does a parent act like a slot machine?
At the time, nothing. But sometimes, randomly, you hit the jackpot. That randomness is what keeps you pulling the lever. It's addictive. Now, imagine a child asking for candy in the grocery store.
Okay, I'm picturing it. They're whining.
Right. The parent says no. The kid whines more. Parent says no. The kid screams. The parent is embarrassed. They're tired. They just want to leave. So finally they say, "Fine, here," and give them the candy.
They hit the jackpot?
Exactly. The parent thinks, "I just bought myself some peace and quiet." But what they actually did was teach the child that the price of a candy bar is exactly 10 screams. So next time, the child will scream 11 times because they know the payout is coming eventually.
That is terrifyingly accurate.
It is. So if we frame the critique this way, we tell the writer, don't just say it confuses the child, say that by being inconsistent, you are literally training your child to nag you longer and harder. If you frame the fix as a way to save the parent's energy and stop the nagging tonight, that is a much stronger hook.
It appeals to the parent's self-interest. Do this and your evening gets easier.
Which feels counterintuitive, right? We always say parenting is about sacrifice. But in this case, the selfish motivation, "I want a peaceful evening," actually leads to the best outcome for the child, which is consistent boundaries. It aligns the parent's needs with the child's needs.
Okay, so what I really like about this critique is that we're not changing the core facts. The mistakes listed are real mistakes, but we are completely overhauling how they're presented to maximize the impact. We're telling the writer to move from a list of don'ts to a manual for do's.
And from binary thinking to nuanced spectrums, we're asking them to respect the intelligence and the struggle of the reader.
Is there a risk that focusing on these psychological concepts, slot machines, ipsative assessment, might make the piece a little too dense?
That is a risk, for sure. The writer needs to be careful not to write a textbook. But if they use the metaphors, the scaffold, the walls of the house, the slot machine, those are sticky ideas. They simplify the psychology rather than complicating it.
So, to recap the main pillars of our critique today. First, we want to embrace the spectrum, move away from binary pass-fail language and towards concepts like scaffolding and progressive autonomy that show the nuance of parenting. Second, flip to positive skill building. Don't just list the error. Name the hero skill, like ipsative assessment or the power of predictability. And frankly, give the reader a chart or a game to play so they know they're doing it right. Third, create thematic groups. Bind these isolated points into a narrative about emotional safety and structural integrity. We want the writer to actually, visually group these on the page with new subheaders. And finally, highlight immediate consequences. Use concepts like the shutdown and the slot machine effect to create urgency. Show the parent that these changes aren't just for the child's future, they are for the parent's sanity right now. We encourage the listener to take this 7 common parenting mistakes listicle and restructure it into a more philosophical and actionable guide using these lenses. It's a great start, but with these changes, it could be a transformative resource. Please submit the work again once you've had a chance to apply these thoughts. We'd love to see the next iteration. Thanks for listening.